I guess as we start this tour, I just want to point out that there's no one overriding factor that causes us to say that renovating this building is not appropriate. But there's a variety, a myriad of different issues that add up to a point where we finally say the best thing to do is to build a new building. When I was first hired by the school board, I was asked to design a new building. But what I told them back was, first we need to study the existing. So the report that we did was a deep dive into all the deficiencies in this building, and that's what you're going to see today when we walk around. There are a few highlights, a few main areas that do stand out. First being the portable classrooms. There's 6 portable classrooms, and that in and of themselves show a space needs issue, that the school is short by 6 classrooms. The second thing is the proximity to Route 3A and how close it is. The building can't be picked up and moved further away, so anything that happens on this site has to live with that. The last thing is, again, there are a variety of issues inside the building and outside the building that need to be looked at. No one raises to the level of a fatal flaw. But when you add it all together, the cost for fixing all these problems adds up to more than 60% of the replacement cost of the building. And at that point, it makes us think that we should be thinking about a new building and not trying to rehab the existing, because it's just not cost effective. It's not a good use of taxpayer funds. It's not a good investment for the long term. So our study at the end, after studying the existing building, after studying the existing site, came to the conclusion that a new building on a new site was the most appropriate answer.
The first highlight of not just the building but the property is that we do have a traffic pattern that is single entry, single exit. And so every vehicle that comes onto the property has to enter through that single entrance. In fact, actually we have to go against that in order to make dismissal happen, because at dismissal what we have to do is we have to station a staff member out at the exit to actually stop exiting traffic occasionally so that the 9 buses can enter through there and then go to their parking location, which is on the blacktop. But in the morning and in the afternoon, it's single entry. In the morning, you're combining staff arriving as well as parents who are dropping off. They have to queue up, as you can see in this driveway. We can double stack them as we need them. But in the morning, it's single, and they drop off their child and the cars continue. We haven't had any staff to make it a safe opportunity, but not ideal. With it being single lane, oftentimes that traffic will back up all the way past Ann's Lane and almost to Pinecrest is that. And then you also have, because they're stalled here, there's no place for left-hand traffic to then turn. So you end up with left-hand traffic, which does their best to get into the middle lane, and now you have this pseudo-created right passing lane for them to get around. But it is certainly congested and not ideal, but we do our best. So
just want to restate something here for a second, in that the buses park on the paved play area.
For pickup.
For pickup.
For pickup. In the morning, the buses are right there with the traffic, and so another reason for that backup is one car dropping off one student is a fairly quick transition, but when you're talking about one bus that's dropping up 30 to 50 students at any given time, that's where you kind of get some of those delays. And again, without having to create 2-way traffic in a 1 traffic lane, that's really the only option that we have.
And the state planning rules require that buses and cars have separate areas for pickup and drop off.
That I'd want to point out, which doesn't have to do so much with operations, but it really is a convenience, which is that there is our oil tank. And so when we get oil, they need to access that. And when they tell us that they are going to deliver oil, we can't refuse, because if we refuse, we're not getting the oil. Oftentimes, maybe we're lucky, that ends up being at a drop-off or dismissal time, which means the description that I just showed you, that kind of scenario, add an 18-wheeler tanker onto this sidewalk right here. That's happened more than once, but that is where the oil is, and I think Dave Ross can actually tell you a little bit more about the condition of that oil tank. I can't speak to that, but I know. But that's the current placement. I'm speaking loud because there's a lot of traffic behind me, and I'm glad about that. It shows you noise pollution effect that we have. If you look right over there, those windows are classrooms. That noise pollution that happens from the main highway also leaks into that classroom learning experience.
This tank was put in 2000.
So 22 years old.
22 years old. It's a double wall tank. It's fiberglass. It is submerged underwater. That's why they had to put the concrete slab over it to keep it down in submerged under the ground. When the tank goes empty, they're worried about it emerging up through the earth.
So that slab is an anchor, basically.
Correct.
When you say the oil's coming, I can't refuse it, and they usually always come at like 7:30 in the morning as we're ready for drop off. So we've had more than one morning where there's an 18-wheeler parked here, and we just kind of figure out how to get the cars around it. And
to send it back to Maynard, Mass is a large fee. He usually backs up his 18-wheeler until he hits that sign. As you can see, it's bent up until about where the walkway is. So he completely blocks the walkway. He doesn't have a choice. A lot of times he might be able to hit the middle school first, depending on timing.
Yep, but it's another factor that we have to consider. I've been asked more than once whether we don't really use this small loop anymore. And just so you know, when it comes to the small loop, we were told by the bus company that they could really only unload 1 or 2 buses at one time. Also, it's nearly impossible for them to actually turn left out of the bus, and when they're done dropping off, they're going in that direction. And so they prefer to use the big loop, and also we can max it. So we looked at, all right, we use that for the bus loop, we use this for the car drop off. Well, the car drop off, you can basically get 5 or 6 cars in here before it goes, and we're just this much closer to Ann Lane, we're just this much closer to Pinecrest, and there we can get 20 cars in and unload it. This one actually made it worse. And so we use this basically just for a few specific drop-offs and pickups that mostly have to do on the student services side. So we do have this option, it's just not a very good option. Behind me, and I think Mike's gonna talk about it, you have what's referred to as the 30s building. It is no longer in use for function, but that doesn't stop people from going to it, because I can tell you that more than once we've gotten a call from someone who says, I'm at the front door and I don't know how to get in. And at first we'd look at the front door and there was no one there. Now we know when they say I'm at the front door, we know that they're here, which means a runaround. So we do have this part. So turn it over to Mike and Kyle.
So a couple of things to point out. So the 30s building is unoccupied. It's basically one of our closets right now. It's used for storage. There's furniture, paper, and other stuff that is stored inside there. It's not ADA accessible. And so, you know, obviously trying to get somebody up those stairs would be a challenge. From inside, there is a ramp that goes down. However, that ramp does not even come close to meeting any ADA accessibility codes. It's way too steep. And then even if you got down to the bottom, you couldn't get back up the stairs that are there. So there's quite a few issues with this part of the building. But it is the original school in Litchfield. I think another thing that I want to point out is, to me, a community-based elementary school ought to be something that is walkable. It ought to be something that students can access by bicycle. And when we look at this location, we're really severely limited. Although we came down the sidewalk, you see how close it is to a major highway and the amount of traffic that's coming through here. And the sidewalk terminates at the school. You can't really get and approach the school from the other direction because the sidewalk doesn't continue down. So this will tie in as an emergency way to get up to the middle school, but that's where the limitation is right now. It basically connects from here up the hill, down McElwain, but that's it. So those are key things to point out here.
Well, one thing while we're still here is to talk about the property lines.
Oh.
And as we're getting close, you'll be able to see that the 1930s building was built on a small, sort of triangular shaped piece of property that was donated to the school. What's happened now, as the building has expanded, parts of the building have become closer and closer to property lines, and it squeezes the room on the site. So anything that we would try to do to fix certain things such as drainage, we're limited by the space that we have around the building. Emergency vehicles would not be able to get around all sides of the building, and just access, and you'll see that as we walk through. Just want to put that in your minds.
Yeah, hold on. It's not so bad today, maybe because of the wind blow, but I'll have Oscar maybe turn the camera over to see what our neighbor across the street is. That is an active livestock farm, and so many times, especially in this time, if you get that nice easterly wind, you add that element of the smell, as well as what comes along with livestock, which is oftentimes insects. And so yet another quaint component of the property and the building.
Down here is the far corner of the piece of property. It creates a triangle through here, and the property line essentially follows this drainage ditch all the way through, and where it's the closest is probably, not really even sure, 5 or 10 feet off the building. So there's not a whole lot of room between the building, the property line. And so if we were to try to solve some of the rain runoff and drainage problems that we have here, it's almost impossible because we don't actually own the ditch that it goes through. And in fact, where it exits out the property and across the street, those culverts, according to the Turner Group report from a few years ago, those culverts aren't big enough to handle all the runoff. And so the solution here is not easy. There's not really a viable option to make this work. So as we walk down through, the other thing to look at is the building itself. The 1930s building is a solidly built building, but the 40s and 50s wing that attaches to it is not as well designed. If you look around the back when we get there, you'll see that the outside walls are single width concrete blocks. So that means the concrete block that you see on the inside of the building is the same block that's on the outside. So not a lot of insulation and not a lot of protection from rain and moisture issues and things of that nature. When you look at the building on the outside, you can see that the roofs are pitched in such a way that the rain runs off the eave and stains. And then on this side, where it doesn't get a lot of sunlight and air, it's actually created mold on the underside of the soffit. And so that water drains to the building rather than draining away from the building, which is not a good design. This is actually an emergency egress door. So in the event of a fire or a fire alarm going off, kids have to exit through here and get out towards the street. And so they're actually exiting towards the highway, which is not really a good idea, but there's not another direction to go here.
And also on that, as we enter the building, you notice in order to create this egress to get us up to closer to code, we had to carve this egress out of a classroom. So the
Right.
windows that you see right here, this was all a classroom, but to create that form of egress, we basically had to take a third of the classroom, leaving us with a 2/3 size classroom, which obviously can't act as a classroom. So what we use it as is what is still an overcrowded tutoring center. So that's what we kind of made use of that. But going back to the capacity issues, even with the size of the building, we still are down even one more classroom that we used to have.
So the mowed lawn on this side is privately owned. So the property line is somewhere between this railing and that flat piece of ground. So very little opportunity to do anything with this strip to try to solve some of these water, moisture, and high groundwater issues.
So this is the courtyard. Because of the high water table, it leaves very little function. I'm actually, if you find some low spots, you're going to find some moisture because we had some rain yesterday. But it gives some outdoor space, but as you can kind of generally feel, it's like the least outdoors feeling outdoor space ever. It's very kind of concrete, confined, and again, just with the soil, with the water table, it leaves us very little function. Occasionally, with ideal weather conditions, we do have a table that you can enjoy some lunch, but it's not like you would take a full class out here. You get the sounds of the ventilation system. You get, I don't know if the camera's picking this up, but just the all concrete block echo that you have. It has a, not an elementary school feel. We'll leave it at that.
And so this is an example of what I was saying. If you look at the white walls, they're single white concrete, so they're only 8 inches thick, and it's the same block on the inside as the outside. So not a lot of protection against the rain. And even the brick walls, from what I can tell, looking at the existing drawings, there's no insulation. So when the wind-driven rain hits that brick and fills it up, it starts to come out on the inside, and thus without a better design for flashing and being able to deal with the rain, that creates a lot of the moisture problems that we're seeing.
And just to speak to maintenance and upkeep, if you can imagine, we're surrounded by buildings, so in order to mow or upkeep this, the grass crew has to literally bring a lawnmower through the hallways and then out here to mow it, and then bring a used lawnmower which has that, freshly cut grass, back through the hallways and out of the building. So that's the access point.
Not to mention the noise
Yeah.
created from to the 2 classrooms that are over here.
Yeah,
It's pretty loud.
it is very loud. This hallway, and we're going to duck into one of these rooms, is a good kind of feel for what this section of the building feels like. It's very tight, and as you can see, this is the best it's going to be, because as you see, this is where student storage is. So imagine this hallway and then add to it large backpacks, winter coats, and so the reality of the hallway is this is where your passable lane kind of starts. You'll also notice too, as we go through the building, we don't have many small spaces or collaborative spaces. We have classroom and we have hallway. And so if any learning wants to take place outside of the classroom, either in small group or for tutoring or for support, it's happening in these hallways that I just described. It's kind of this very narrow, low ceiling, dark carpeted, condensed from school supplies in this hallway. So we make use with what we have, and that's what we have. I want to duck into the classroom too, because when we talked earlier about being on a low ground with a high water table, the rooms in this section too, when you get to it, you're really going to notice that it almost has a subterranean feel. You're going to feel a little bit below earth. It just feels very, very low.
So just a couple of things to point out down here. I mean, basically the building is used for storage. This is paper and toilet paper and just material that we need to keep the school operating. But it's, like I said, it's really a closet. We do have to keep this building heated because Dave is right about at the water main to the building. So water main's in there. So all the water coming into the entire school comes through here. So we have to keep this heated to make sure that the water main doesn't freeze. And you can see like where the sheetrock got cut out, there had been a flood at some point.
Sewage backup.
Sewage backup.
Surge backup backs up into the lowest point of the entire facility, which was here, the basement. And we didn't know until a few days later.
And you all had the experience of coming down the ramp, and you can understand why that does not meet any ADA code compliance.
As we move forward, I'm leaving the fan on, just so you can kind of get a sense. Those fans are necessary to make these floors safe and passable. Without them going, especially on a day like today, the humidity creates floor slick, so that it starts to make it unsafe. So we have these fans going. So again, we talked about that noise pollution coming from the road. That's internal noise pollution that happens that affects the classroom experience inside the building. So we're going to leave the fan running so you hear just how loud it is to be right outside. And that one is placed right outside the classroom and the music room.
But Dan, without that fan, this is a slip and slide.
This is a floor slip. Yep.
This is a grinding pumping station for raw sewage, solid waste sewage. It grinds, it pumps into the next chamber, which therefore, after several chambers, gets out to the Litchfield.
So people ask me what my nightmare is with the building. This is failure. This is my nightmare. This is every once in a while that thought creeps in at like 11:30 at night, and I'm going, well,
It's
now I'm not
all
going
right.
to sleep. So the thought is this, or some sort of backup that we don't know the location, and then the solution where we don't know the location is under classrooms, and that requires some level of disruption, we'll say, in order. So this is our cafeteria. For those of you who haven't oriented yourself to, if you look, this is, besides the 30s building, which is unoccupied, this is the closest occupied space to the highway. And so when we talked about that, a pitcher's mounted home plate, that's the distance. So yes, this room is occupied for lunch. It's occupied for 2.5 hours a day with whole classes in here. It is an okay size space. It's not an ideal size space because you have this area, which is kind of your eating area, and then this is your serving area. And the service station has what I refer to as a vertical design when you really want a horizontal design. And so the proximity of the windows and the lack of width on either side means that the way to serve and to check out requires vertical lines into the serving station and then back out, where ideally you'd want so you could have a horizontal flow, so that you could have an entry point, an exit point, and you could have a flow. What you have is two lines that then end up competing against each other, so it gets a little chaotic, and as you can see, it's very open, so we do our best with the placement of the sides island and the milk coolers to kind of get a semblance of line and order. And then you have students on this section here, which looks like a large space, but you gotta imagine you're fitting a class of anywhere from 18 to 22 students at each table. It does not create a great enough distance when you start talking about food allergies and other type food-based situations that you have to kind of work with. That creates a space like over here, which does create separation, but it does not create distance. And so those are just some of the obstacles that we deal with.
And the kitchen also creates challenges. I mean, you know, that kitchen setup is 1950s era. You're talking food service post-World War II, right?
Yep.
So it's how do we feed a lot of people at once using post-war thinking, right?
Yeah.
That is not what we're currently asking our food service people to do and prepare. So it's not laid out well. There's weird aspects to it.
I brought you into this classroom because this row of 3 classrooms that we're in right here are actually the 3 most modern classrooms in the main building. These are the last 3 added. Again, as we talked about that expansion plan, they put on the main wing that added the library and what we call the 4th grade wing, which connected the science lab, office, gym to the rest of the building. And then they said, we still need 3 more classrooms, I believe in 1983. So that's when these 3 rooms were added. And so you can see over there, we have, as we do in most of our classrooms, a dehumidifier, which is running all the time. The reason why it's not running right now is because it's already full for the 3rd time today. That's how much moisture it's kind of trapping in. So our custodial staff is using an awful lot of time and energy emptying dehumidifiers just from the moisture that's captured. We also, when they built these, they built it with that single gigantor window on each, which means, when you build windows that big, and Kyle and someone in buildings and ground, a window that big is naturally going to warp over time. So the windows in these rooms have become our draftiest windows just because over time, windows warp. When you put metal onto cement, cracks are created. And so there's become drafty windows, which we have now solved by adding space heaters into these classrooms and taking the largest piece of shrink cellophane that you can think of and sealing off those windows so we don't have drafts in the winter. And that is the condition of our most modern classrooms. It's also the north side of the building, and so actually, Kyle, I don't know if you can open those. Again, talk about proximity. Back to that vehicular traffic. That's the driveway to the main school. So all traffic, not passing by, but all traffic that goes into the school is passing through these 3 classrooms. And I should also note too, even being the most modern, these rooms still come in as undersized based on state recommended size for classrooms. It looks like the rooms are connected, but they're really not. And so you have this hallway, which is 3rd and 4th grade. And so it may look on the drawing like 3rd grade is together, but 3rd grade is that door, this room, and then those 2 down there. So intra-grade collaboration isn't easy to do because you have 2 classrooms here, and then it is a fairly far hall for the other 2 classrooms. After that, the 4th grade takes up, if you can see that 2nd door, all the way to the end of the hallway. It looks like a straight line and it looks like they're touching rooms, but they're not touching in a collaborative type way that involves kind of integration or any kind of collaboration that happens. It's the straight line effect. All right, so we're out here because I want to tell the story of a snow day that we had in 2021. It was a remote day because of weather, so no one was in the building, but I got a text from Dave at around 10:30 that says, we've discovered a large leak at GMS. And so basically what happened is, by luck, I will have to tell you, that Joe Underwood happened to be walking by and paying attention auditorily to hear a drip, drip, drip. And he said, I hear something dripping. And he investigated that drip. And when he investigated that drip, he discovered that the bathroom that's on the other side of this wall was more of a mini flood. He said, I should check on the other side of that wall. Luckily he did, because on the other side of that wall is the library. And it had already taken out 3 bookshelves levels of books. It not only was a snow day, I should say, it was a Friday. And so the amount of things that had to go right to discover that problem and rectify it, and damage fairly mitigated, but a lot of lucky things had to happen. And the reason that that leak happened was right behind here, you can see that we have this drainage culvert right here. Water, or in this case, snow, collects on the roof, it enters through that culvert. It then goes into that pipe, underground, and somewhere over there, it drains out. And so what happened, and I think Dave can, is that somewhere in between the entry point on the roof, down through this wall, out that pipe, and along underground in this grassy area, naturally, a freeze had occurred. And so a freeze had occurred, which meant that that water was just backing up and not able to drain into the berm over there like it's intended to do. And that was the source of the leak that, if it weren't for a good ear and a lucky moment, could have taken out our whole library.
The only way I could remedy was to pull the boot off of that drain and let it drain down under the foundation. And when I did that, thousands of gallons of water came out of there. We got soaked.
Yeah.
As you see, I had to do all the other ones all the way down. They all failed. When they go to a daylight drain and we get a cold day, it freezes solid. Then you get a rainy day, so it's rain, and all that rain collects up on the roof. Instead of going down the roof drain, it accumulates like a pond up there.
Yeah. So just kind of give you a sense of the play yard. This is exclusively a pre-K area, so it's small, it's fenced off, it's never more than 10 or 12 kids there. However, as you can see, we have just random things. I think Dave can speak to them a little bit more. We have the water drainage valves, we have a water pump shed. I don't know what that secret.
That's a septic tank.
That's a septic tank.
And it's the width of, well, the length of where the manholes are. So that's probably around 10,000 gallons. There's 2 3-phase pumps in there as well. That's another clean out. That's another clean out. That pump house there is the actual final pump house for the sewerage. Takes it off to the leaching fields. That's why we put an alarm on it. As you see, there's a red light there. If that ever overflows, it trips a float and it turns on an alarm so we can see from the parking lot. Otherwise, we have nothing that would indicate of a fail. Before that, you'll see manhole covers as well. Another 10,000 gallon septic tank there that we just recently replaced. 2002, 2005. There it is, sold.
Dave, can you just comment for a second? I mean, I'm listening to this, the path of sewage throughout here, and it's like pumping station, holding tank, pumping station.
A lot of things that need to go right.
That's not the case at the middle school or at Campbell, right?
It is not. This is a case of adding on several different additions.
Okay. And each one of those is a potential failure point.
And have been potential
problem,
failure.
right?
Yeah.
Because this is, I just find this incredibly unusual.
Are they working currently? Yes. Do they fail? Yes. We don't mention about that. There's twin pumps in every one of these chambers, and they're very expensive. They're giant 3-phase pumps. They require a small crane to uproot them. There's a lot of labor involved. And to have one of these chambers go down on us, we literally have to have a pumping truck on site during the school day, pumping until the school gets out. It's that